Should I start? I don't know what.
Yeah, you can.
Cool. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the community sync. We have week 13. Huh? We have? Oh no, not week 13, but yeah. Anyway, so in my latest pull request, I introduce new targets for edit module and summary. So now we have everything should be now extendable in the checkout. So this means in this pull request, we have a lot of tests because it was like I did some movements of components and did some refactoring, also some performance improvements. So let me search the target here. This is the file. This is the target. So I introduce a new summary collection. This allows developers to hook in on the summary page. So this means if your payment needs a summary or would like to have a custom summary, we have a default summary, but if you want to doing some different style of summary page, you can now hook in and place your component. It works really similar to the edit model and to the other things we was thinking about, or Tommy was proposing here. Maybe we merge all 4 collections together to having an API like we have an object and having subcomponents. But I did some spike on it or take a look on it, but it was like not a quick win that we can introduce one API for all 4 things to not blow up the pull request so much. So for that reason, I think for the next release, there will be 4 APIs, and maybe the release after the next release, we change the API a little bit, but also have some documents about upgrade if it's possible. Yeah, if you are interested on how you can extend the checkout, I will also update my blog post on my blog. So this demystify blog post on my blog. Also, I think we will have a small thing in the docs, or a small thing in the dev docs about new types. So we get editable payment types. So this means you now are allowed to hook in the edit model. So if a customer clicks on the edit model, it opens up and it allows you to edit your payment. Also, a further thing here, now with this new APIs, it's possible to move Braintree out of core and move it in a separate extension. But this is a future thing, what maybe happens in some future time. But yeah, this is all about this. So if you have any question, you can ping me in the community Slack, or go over the pull request. I also refactored the Braintree, so it's already using the new APIs to hook in the checkout. So.
Thanks, Lars. That's awesome. I mean, making checkout even more extensible, it's a great thing. Meanwhile, Jimmy just joined, so we can use the rest of 15 minutes of this call to discuss the theming.
Okay. Let me get set up here to share screen. Okay. So I have posted the theming proposal based on an earlier demo that we did a while back, I think, here on this same community call, where I suggested that we were looking at introducing Tailwind to PWA Studio to finally give us a true theming solution. So theming means a lot of different things to a lot of people. I know it has a very specific meaning in Magento, and so we don't want to be ambiguous about what it is we're shooting for. So a lot of this is explanation, right? And it's in kind of detail. So we're not gonna walk through it here on this call, but ultimately what we are trying to do is we are trying to combine our existing approach of CSS modules, which is good for optimization's sake, and Tailwind, which is also good for optimization but has its own opinions, to give us a system where you can write a package that will define the entire palette of values that your CSS will use, and then you can either add as much CSS as you want, through a JavaScript API, or you can just write it through CSS, and it will take a look at all of your CSS and give it true dead code elimination, right? Which is anything you don't use will be excluded. So ideally, we want as much as possible of our styles to live in a separate location from our code, in a place where you can define it in your own package, in a place where we can define it in our own package, and then you can override it. So this is ultimately what your config file could look like if you wanted to use exactly the Venia theme, right? You would, when you scaffolded an app, you would get your own config, you get your own Tailwind config file, and you would just say, I'm pulling in the Venia theme, listing it as a preset, and then any changes you wanted to make would happen here in the config, and you would override on a granular level the presentation purposes that you'd make. Um, our theme would also export components for each of our plugins for each of our components, and that would give you the ability to sort of override our component styles on a per component basis as well. So you could keep our buttons and change how our accordions work, keep the header, change how the footer works, etc. And then we would have a config section inside of our preset that would allow you to sort of enable, disable, or override each of those plugins. So the full details are in this document. We're not going to walk through it too much. We did evaluate a couple of others. We looked into Bootstrap, which is kind of the main one. Adobe Spectrum, which is a really great CSS library offered by Adobe. And in the future, Spectrum could be really interesting for us as well. We might have like a Spectrum theme. It's just not quite there for our purposes yet. But keep your eyes on that one. And then Tailwind had the things we needed most, right? The configurability and the optimization to exclude those rule sets that are not being used. So This is going to generate a single style sheet, that'll be served up front, but that style sheet will be as minimal as possible. And in the future, I do think that there should be a way for us to even code split that style sheet. So nothing just yet, but I do expect that should be possible down the line. So anyway, I highly suggest that you take a look at our wiki, read through the document, see if this aligns with your sort of expectations. If it's missing something, or if you think there's a flaw here, I would love to hear about it. So post a comment or talk about it in the community Slack, and keep your eyes peeled for an initial PR coming soon that will kind of introduce the config, and then the team will start working on it later this quarter.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, and just like a reminder that this is something that it's just one step of a multi-step journey of updating and streamlining the designer developer workflow with the PWA storefront. So with the Magento 2.4.3, we are introducing the Venia UI kit. So basically, it's a file, the XD file that is available and that defines the Venia style sheet. With the next step of introducing the theming that Jimmy just walked us through, it's like introducing the second pillar on the developer side of the workflow. And ultimate goal for us is to combine these two and introduce the integration between the XD files and the theme for the PWA storefront. So as Jimmy was saying, the immediate next steps in the theming work stream would be introducing just like a framework and limiting the scope to a certain area of the storefront. And then we will move forward defining the variables for the clean theme and for the Venia theme. And that would be a developer focus for the rest of the year for us. So just be sure to provide feedback and share your opinion. This is something that we believe is very important to raise the awareness across all the community and make sure that we are doing the right thing that will improve the storefront developer life in general. Any comments, questions? There's a question in Slack, in the chat. Less files can also be targeted in that Tailwind config. Adolfo was asking, Jimmy.
Oh, I see. Can be targeted in the config file. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So the way that we are intending to use Tailwind is that you point Tailwind at where your content is, and your content is the thing that says, here are the CSS classes I'm using. And so by default, we're going to point it at our CSS files, right, at our CSS modules, so like within Venia UI. But if you wanted to apply class names from less files, you can include less files in the regex for what you consider to be your content. So you say these less files are my content, and then the content parser will look at your less files instead of our CSS files, right? Or as well as, or whatever. And then if you really wanted, if you don't like using the CSS modules step, you feel like putting them directly in the components, you can point them at your JSX files or whatever instead. So that was one of the big advantages of that for us.
So we have 4 minutes left. Some time to ask questions and have a conversation. Don't waste that opportunity.
I have a question, Elena. So with Tailwind being a utility first CSS framework, I've seen that create issues with the class name property being pretty polluted with an abundance of utility classes. Do you guys have any plan for how you expect to see those utility classes used, or are you mostly just using Tailwind for its configurations?
Sure. Mostly using it for the configurations. It does add a bunch of stuff to the class name property. But because we're going to keep CSS modules, and we're not actually going to change how class names are applied to the component, you're still going to have that unique class name per element of the component, and you can still write CSS in there if that's something that you need.
So would you anticipate the utility classes being used heavily, moderately, or very little?
I would expect us to use them as much as possible for their optimization sake, if that makes sense, right? The goal is to have as much of the CSS in Benio use the same, reuse those same utility classes so that we have to serve less CSS over the time, right?
Okay.
And the main idea here is to have composers. So you inherit CSS from Tailwind, and you get in the end a smaller file.
Right. It's all done through CSS modules composes keyword. So you're not juggling all of those classes, all those different utility classes in your components. You're still saying, this is the root element, this is the title element, right? This is the price element, and those get classes.price. But then in your CSS module, you say, okay, the root class, the title class, the price class, rather than putting a bunch of arbitrary CSS in these places, you have it composed from the Tailwind class names. And now whenever you change your Tailwind config, those properties will change. And those properties will reuse the same declarations that you already served.
So you end up with kind of a global root, a global price defined within Tailwind configuration.
Not quite. You can. It depends on whether you do it as a plugin or whether you do it. Let me try and share real quick one more time. Let's see. Here we go. So in this example, here's the component, right? Like a panel component. It applies classes root, header, body, which are imported from the CSS module. Here's the header, here's the body. These are going to get applied. And then the header is also going to compose an animated. So this is kind of how our current CSS works.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is what it would look like afterwards. Right. So you'd compose from either something defined by a plugin or from those granular things themselves, right? So, composes grid from global, composes, transition, duration, whatever, from global, right? And so you have a bunch of these, and so these classes are still hash and unique to the component, but these classes are global.
I see.
So what would be the difference between Tailwind and just like importing it from a global CSS file, like without Tailwind?
So the big difference is that the bundler, the Webpack process is going to statically analyze all of your content and look at which one of the generated Tailwind class names are used and which aren't. So like if you didn't have that, the total theme would be several megabytes in size, right?
Right.
So the key is that by having this bundler process, you're only going to be using some of the CSS that your theme creates, right? And it's really just going to be, several kilobytes, right?
Right. So from Tailwind, we will be probably like using stuff like flex blocks, grids, and that kind of stuff. And then we only take from Tailwind what we need, right? And the rest we could just customize to our needs.
Yeah. So most of, so Tailwind will have a utility class name for, for pretty much every CSS property that you might use, like display grid, display flex, stuff like that. But then most of the real CSS you're writing is like sizing, colors, spacing, stuff like that. And so that's the stuff where it'll really help to have a palette so that you have a consistent theme that can be changed. But also to have this dead code elimination so that you generate combinations for all of the items in your palette and then only ship to the shopper the ones that you end up using.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, so there is a POC, and I will try to share that repo in this proposal so that you can run it and try it out. But then, like I said, we'll also have a branch coming soon where you'll be able to get a feel for it.
Jimmy, would you be adding utility classes via composes as well in the CSS module, or would you be adding that in the markup?
We'll be
have either option.
We'll be adding it in the CSS module, but on your own site, you'll have either option.
And as you said, the benefit of doing that is it has the potential to cut down on the final file size if classes go unused. Is that right?
It actually won't matter whether you apply it in the component or in the CSS module. You'll get the benefits from bundling either way, as long as you configure Tailwind to know where to look, right? It's like if you're putting it in your component, then you need to tell Tailwind that it needs to look in your components for class name usage. But the reason we're keeping this CSS module and the composes thing is that having one local class name per element preserves your ability to ignore all this Tailwind stuff if you don't want. So you can just write CSS in here like you do today and forget that we even use Tailwind if you don't like it. But also this establishes a good API for our components that is likely to be part of any like future extension work we do around components. So these local single class names almost act as identifiers within the component. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like,
And you're anticipating this being about 2 major version releases out? Is that right?
I think so. Because the next one we're getting ready to wrap up here, so it'll be an 11, and then this work hasn't really started yet, in earnest. So so it'll probably aim for the next version.
Great.
And would this deprecate classify as a whole, or does it work together?
Should work together. That's a good question, actually. So classify in general, is really just a thin wrapper around merging classes, right? And that API still works for taking classes that come in via props and overriding. The problem for us is that API requires you to do some level of component override, right? Like you have to be rendering our components from somewhere.
Right.
And the goal with this is to give people an alternative that doesn't involve overriding components, as much as possible.
Right. But it's still like, let's say you have like a panel, for example, and you have it always styled the same way, and then at one specific location you need to restyle it. Like,
yeah.
Right now that would be done via declassify by order component, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's still going to be that way. So, as part of all of this, right, and as part of recent changes, we are also considering whether the classify call should move into the talons or not. So that's not part of this. That's not part of this proposal. That's not something we're like set on doing. We're just thinking about it. So I'd be interested if you're using that API. If any of you are using that classify API, I'd be interested in hearing whether you think it would be easier, better or worse, if we were to put that in the talon so that you could get at it from wrapping a talon, or whether you prefer to have that in the component.
Right. Right. Thanks.
Jimmy, for the utility classes that Tailwind exposes, those would be usable in the context of a page builder content type in the class field, right? For clients, if they wanted to have more granular control over the.
That is a good call out. So we would have to update page builder to know about them, if that makes sense. But yeah, they would be available, right? So
Awesome.
You can see, right, that like I said, because Tailwind has to know where to look for class name usage in order for those class names to be served. That does mean that we would have to either help Tailwind look at page builder content, which sounds difficult, maybe impossible, or we would have to have some sort of layer where you specified which class names you were offering to page builder and then load it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wasn't even thinking about those styles being reflected on the back end, most so that they just would be editable in the back end, but reflected in the front end.
Right. Yeah, that's a distinction. So either way, I think it's likely that we will have, like a page builder CSS module that imports some class names that we expose to page builder for usage.
Yeah, cool.
Good call out, because AEM is going to want the same thing. So
I just knew Dave was probably thinking about it, so I'm just covering for him.
yeah.
I worked on page builder every year, Nathan. There's another team working on it now, so it's definitely something we'll probably need to loop them in on to make sure they're aware of these changes.
Yep. I just know that's your baby, right?
I actually handed it off to another engineer over a year ago, so my new baby is PWA Studio, along with these great folk. So
Very cool. Very cool.
So
Dave has multiple babies now.
Yeah. Child support payments are getting pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, that's great to have like that many questions. at least that shows that there is an interest to what we're doing, and the hope that we're doing it right. So thank you for joining, and you always can come back with questions and comments via Slack channel. The proposal from Jimmy is out on the GitHub, and keep your eyes on the updates that are gonna come soon with the PWA theming. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Have a nice day.